Welcome to Proper Certification of Travel Authorizations and Travel Claims. This course is comprised of 14 lessons, followed by an online multiple-choice exam. View each lesson in its entirety and in the order presented. The timestamp for each lesson can be found in the video description below. After viewing all 14 lessons, you are required to take the online exam. Instructions for accessing the exam can be found in the video description below. The exam is graded, and you must meet a minimum score. The following symbols draw your attention to a particular point or topic. The red circle and exclamation point denotes a very important point. The yellow caution triangle denotes a safety note warning that failure to heed the point will likely cause significant issues. The blue exclamation point and banner denotes a best practice. And the blue binoculars denote a case study used to further explain or provide an example. Lesson 1, Glossary. This lesson consists of 3 parts. The learning objectives. The course content. 3 knowledge check questions. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to recall terms and definitions closely associated with appropriations availability and travel claim validation. Notice, this course cites laws and regulations, which are legislative rules. This course provides information on functional application of the legislative rules cited. Information is necessarily interpreted to facilitate student understanding and proper application of the legislative rules. This course is not legal opinion. Students are advised to consult an Office of the General Counsel attorney if legal opinion is needed. Sources: the definitions herein are from original sources, including the Glossary of Terms for both Chambers of Congress, OMB Circular A11, and the Federal Travel Regulation. Appropriation, a law of Congress that provides an agency with budget authority. An appropriation allows the agency to incur obligations and to make payments from the U.S. Treasury for specified purposes. Appropriations are definite, a specific sum of money, or indefinite, an amount for such sums as may be necessary. Congress passes 12 annual appropriation acts, as well as supplemental appropriation acts, each year. These appropriation acts provide budget authority to obligate and expend funds from the U.S. Treasury for specific purposes. There are several kinds of appropriations. Annual or single-year appropriations. Multi-year appropriations. Annual appropriations, also called fiscal year or one-year appropriations, are made for a specified fiscal year, and are available for obligation only during that fiscal year. Funds expire after 1 year and are no longer available to incur new obligations. Annual appropriations retain the fiscal year identity and remain available for recording, adjusting, and liquidating existing obligations and liabilities previously incurred. Funds canceled 2 years after expiration are no longer available for obligation or expenditure for any purpose, and are returned to the U.S. Treasury. Multiple-year appropriations are available for obligation for a definite period in excess of 1 fiscal year. The House has 15-month, 18-month, and 27-month multi-year funding. Funds expire based on the extended period of availability, and are no longer available to incur new obligations. Multiple-year appropriations retain the fiscal year identity for the extended period, and remain available for recording, adjusting, and liquidating existing obligations and liabilities previously incurred. Funds canceled 2 years after expiration are no longer available for obligation or expenditure for any purpose, and are returned to the U.S. Treasury. No-year appropriations. Appropriations available for obligations for an indefinite period of time without fiscal year limitation. They are available until they are used up. Expired appropriation. An appropriation or fund account in which the balance is no longer available for incurring new obligations, because the time available for incurring such obligations has expired. Funds may still be available for the recording and repayment, liquidation, of obligations properly incurred. Closed appropriation, cancelled. An appropriation or fund account in which the balance has been closed or cancelled, and is no longer available for obligation or expenditure for any purpose. Budget Object Code. The Office of Management and Budget, OMB, Circular 11, provides guidance on preparing the budget submission in the President's budget, and instructions on budget execution. Included in this guidance is the object class structure. Object classes are categories, or accounting identifiers, used to code financial obligations according to the nature of the services or items purchased by the federal government. These 2-digit codes are standard classifications used throughout the federal government. Subclassifications, referred to as budget object codes, are 4-digit codes established by individual agencies to best reflect the nature of their transactions. Obligations need to be classified by the initial purpose for which they are incurred, rather than for the end services or products provided. Travel falls within the major Object Class 20, Contractual Services and Supplies. Within Object Class 20 is categorized Object Class 21.0, Travel and Transportation of Persons. Certifying Official. An officer or employee of an executive agency responsible for certifying appropriations availability as to purpose, time, and amounts, or having written authorization from the head of the agency, as the accountable official to certify claims, vouchers, and to examine a voucher if necessary to decide whether it is in proper form, is certified and approved, and is computed correctly, based on the facts as certified by the claimant and the approving official, pursuant to 31 U.S. Code Section 3325 and the Federal Travel Regulation. Claimant. The person who submits a travel claim, voucher. It is used interchangeably with the word employee regarding travel claims, because of the Federal Travel Regulations' broad definition of employee. Disbursing official. An official in the executive branch of the United States government who 1. Disburses money as provided by a voucher, claim, certified by the head of the executive agency concerned, or by an officer or employee of the executive agency having written authorization from the head of the agency to certify vouchers. 2. Examines a voucher if necessary to decide whether it is in proper form, is certified and approved, and is computed correctly based on the facts certified, and 3. Is accountable for carrying out points 1 and 2. See 31 U.S. Code Section 3325, Vouchers. A disbursing official is not a certifying officer. eGov Travel Service, ETS. The government-contracted, end-to-end travel management service that automates and consolidates the federal travel process in a self-service web-centric environment, covering all aspects of official travel, including travel planning, authorization, reservations, ticketing, expense reimbursement, and travel management reporting. The ETS provides the services of a federal travel management program as specified in Section 301-73.1a, b, and e, of the Federal Travel Regulation. Fund. An account or set of accounts related to a particular appropriation the agency has with the U.S. Treasury to record financial transactions for obligation, expenditure, or collection of monies. Revolving fund. Funds authorized by specific provisions of law to finance a continuing cycle of business-type operations. Receipts are credited directly to the revolving fund as offsetting collections, and are available for expenditure without further action by Congress. Monies. The plural of money. For example, they produced a statement of all monies paid into and out of the account. Obligations, a formal order legally committing the federal entity to ultimately pay a future liability. Official/officer. Official means a person holding an office, having official duties derived from authority, while officer means a holder of public office. As used between 31 U.S.C. Sections 3325 and 3528, and the Federal Travel Regulation, the terms are synonymous. The Federal Travel Regulation uses the term certifying officer, so that term is universally applied to travel matters for consistency. Additionally, public office means an office of the government to which someone is appointed. It is not the same as elected office, nor does it pertain to the Appointments Clause of Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, of the United States Constitution, which empowers the President of the United States to nominate and, with the advice and consent, confirmation, of the United States Senate, appoint public officials. Travel and transportation of persons. Travel and transportation costs of government employees and other persons, while in an authorized travel status, that are to be paid by the government, either directly, or by reimbursing the traveler. Consists of both travel away from official stations, subject to regulations governing civilian and military travel, and local travel and transportation of persons in and around the official station of an employee. Travel and transportation of persons includes contracts to transport people from place to place by land, air, or water, such as commercial transportation charges, rental or lease of passenger cars, charter of trains, buses, vessels, or airplanes, ambulance service or hearse service, and expenses incident to the operation of rented or chartered conveyances. Rental or lease of all passenger-carrying vehicles is to be charged to this object class, even though such vehicles may be used incidentally for transportation of things. Incidental travel expenses, which are other expenses directly related to official travel, such as baggage transfer, and telephone and telegraph expenses, as authorized by travel regulations. Travel authorization, orders. Written permission to travel on official business. There are three basic types of travel authorizations, orders. A. Unlimited open. An authorization allowing an employee to travel for any official purpose without further authorization. B. Limited open. An authorization allowing an employee to travel on official business without further authorization under certain specific conditions, for example, travel to specific geographic areas for specific purposes, subject to trip cost ceilings, or for specific periods of time. C. Trip by trip. An authorization allowing an individual or a group of individuals to take one or more specific official business trips, which must include the specific purpose, itinerary, and estimated costs. Travel claim, voucher. A written request, supported by documentation and receipts where applicable, for reimbursement of expenses incurred in the performance of official travel, including permanent change of station, PCS, travel. Knowledge check. A law of Congress that provides an agency with budget authority, is known as an A. Appropriation. B. Fund. C. Disbursement. D. Budget code. Pause this video, consider your response, and then resume to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is A. Appropriation. An account or set of accounts related to a particular appropriation the agency has with the U.S. Treasury, to record financial transactions for obligation, expenditure, or collection of monies, is known as an A. Obligation. B. Fund. C. Budget. D. Budget object code. Pause this video, consider your response, and then resume to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is B. Fund. Which of the following pairs are not synonyms? A. Official, officer. B. Travel authorization, order. C. Disbursement official, certifying official. D. Travel claim, voucher. Pause this video, consider your response, and then resume to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is C. Disbursement official, certifying official. Lesson 2. Fundamentals of Travel Authorizations and Claims, Vouchers. This lesson has 3 parts. The learning objectives. The course content. 3 knowledge check questions. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the 4 phases of executive branch travel, and the 2 phases where certification specifically occurs. Recall the basic travel authorization and claims process steps, from end to end. Recall the 4 types of travel claims, vouchers. State the purpose of a travel authorization. Certification as it pertains to executive branch official travel has 2 sides, both of which serve specific purposes. To understand the dichotomy and the certification obligations of both parts, we will need to first understand the 4 distinct phases of executive branch travel. 1. Planning and estimating. 2. Funding and authorizing. 3. Traveling and incurring expenses. 4. Vouchering and settlement. We will briefly discuss planning and estimating before focusing intensely on vouchering and settlement. The vouchering and settlement phase is where most of a certifying officer's work lies. Overview of the travel authorization process. Step 1. For official travel to be performed, a written travel authorization, order, is prepared, and the expense types and amounts to be allowed are itemized. Step 2. The authorization is routed to a certifying officer, who certifies appropriations availability. Certification is done by applying an electronic signature to the authorization. The certified authorization is then routed to an approving official. Step 3. The management official, usually the employee's supervisor, having knowledge of the travel, then approves the authorization by electronically signing it, to signify they have authorized the employee to travel and incur expenses. Step 4. The employee then travels and incurs expenses, within the limits of the authorization. Note, if the employee is on continuous travel for 30 days or more, then they may file an interim voucher to claim reimbursement of expenses incurred. They may do this once every 30 days. Step 5. Once the official travel is finished, and the employee returns to the official station, they must file a claim for reimbursement within 5 days of returning to work. They may file one final voucher to claim reimbursement of those authorized expenses not previously claimed. Step 6. When a claimant files a claim, they must electronically sign the claim. In doing so, they acknowledge they have read the fraudulent claim, responsibility statement and the Privacy Act statement. Step 7. The designated approving official, Having knowledge of the claimant's travel, reviews the claim to ensure it is proper, applies the federal travel regulation prescribed procedures, and approves the claim. In approving the claim, the approving official signs it, to signify the travel claim is approved for payment based on authorized travel. Step 8. The certifying officer reviews the claim to validate that the approving official ensured the claim is proper, and then signs it, to signify that the travel claim is certified as correct and proper for payment. The federal travel regulation establishes 3 flavors of travel claims, and a 4th was implemented pursuant to 5 U.S.C. 301, Departmental Regulations. Interim claim, voucher, used when an employee is on official travel for 30 or more continuous days. An employee may submit one interim claim every 30 days. Final claim, voucher, used upon completion of official travel to claim all reimbursements due, that have not already been reimbursed through an interim claim. An employee may submit only one final claim. Subsequent claims are not allowed. Reclaim claim, voucher, used to reclaim expense types and amounts disallowed by the designated approving official on the final claim. Local transportation claim, voucher, used to claim expenses to transit the area of the official station to perform official government business, and which exceed the employee's normal commuting costs. Normal commuting costs include fuel, mileage, parking at commuter lots, on streets, and in garages, whether such costs are incurred daily or by a weekly, monthly, or annual subscription service, tolls, ferries, etc. The Civilian Board of Contract Appeals has succinctly written in its rulings, quote, "A travel order establishes the conditions, in writing, under which official travel and transportation are authorized at government expense, and provides a notice and record of the employee's instructions and entitlements. Accordingly, unless an employee's travel orders were clearly erroneous, in conflict with a law, regulation, or agency instruction, or were contrary to the agency's definite intentions when the orders were issued, an agency cannot retroactively amend travel orders to increase or decrease the employee's benefits." End quote. This is important to understand. It does not mean an employee is entitled to be paid that which they do not incur, but they are entitled to spend up to the amount authorized until the authorization ends, or is ended, by the travel being cancelled. It also means the travel authorization cannot be revised, at all, after the start of travel, regardless of the circumstances. Knowledge check. Upon returning to their official workstation, a traveler must file a claim for reimbursement within how many days? A. 1. B. 3. C. 5. D. 7. Click pause, consider your response, and resume the video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is C. 5. John's work-related travel lasts 35 days. What type of claim, voucher, may John file on day 31 to claim reimbursement of expenses incurred during the previous 30 days? A. Interim. B. Final. C. Reclaim. D. Final transportation. Click pause, consider your response, and resume the video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is A. Interim. Which of the following shows the correct routing sequence for authorizing travel? A. Employee creates travel order, certifying officer signs off, approving official signs off, management official signs off. B. Employee creates travel order, approving official signs off, management official signs off, certifying officer signs off. C. Employee creates travel order, management official signs off, certifying officer signs off, approving official signs off. D. Employee creates travel order, management official signs off. Click pause, consider your response, and resume the video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is A. Employee creates travel order, certifying officer signs off, approving official signs off, management official signs off. Lesson 3, Funding and Authorizing Certifying Appropriations Availability. This lesson consists of 3 parts. The learning objectives. The course content. 3 knowledge check questions. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to distinguish between appropriations and funds. Explain how funds and common accounting numbers are related. Provide the foundational laws regarding use of appropriations. Identify the authority to retroactively amend travel authorizations, and who may certify appropriations availability. Describe appropriations availability as to purpose, including how the object class travel aligns to accounting, the travel purpose identifiers, and additional tests for invitational travelers. Describe appropriations availability as to time. Describe appropriations availability as to purpose, including activities a certifying officer might have to perform to avoid Antideficiency Act violations. At the executive branch agency program level, the terms funds and appropriations are often used interchangeably, but they do not mean the same thing. Funds are monies that have been assigned to an account or a set of accounts, a fund, related to a particular appropriation the agency has with the U.S. Treasury, to record financial transactions for obligation, expenditure, or collection of monies. At the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the accounts relating to a particular appropriation are referred to as CANs, meaning Common Accounting Number. An amount of money is assigned to a CAN. Just because appropriations have been ultimately assigned to a fund does not change or lessen the overall responsibilities. Whether the amount of an appropriation is $1 trillion, or just 1 cent is assigned to an account, the responsibility to certify appropriations availability is the same. During the funding and authorizing phase, an employee either requests permission to travel and incur necessary expenses, or a supervisor directs an employee to travel to perform official business, and, in doing so, commits to reimburse the employee certain expenses they might necessarily incur. Federal laws regarding appropriations prohibit making or authorizing an expenditure from, or creating or authorizing an obligation under, any appropriation or fund in excess of the amount available in the appropriation or fund, unless authorized by law. See 31 U.S.C. Section 1341, A. Before an employee can incur, or be authorized to incur, any official travel expenses, the appropriations must be certified as available by an appropriate official, according to the so-called purpose, time, and amounts tests. Unless required by an agency's financial policy, an employee who certifies appropriations availability does not have to be an appointed certifying officer, and there is no pecuniary liability associated with this action. However, there are accountability considerations stemming from the Antideficiency Act. Important note: consult the financial policy, published by the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Financial Resources, and your home organization, to determine whether one must be appointed a certifying officer for the purpose of certifying appropriations availability for travel authorizations. Often, whether for program convenience, limited availability of staffing, program practices, or other reasons, someone appointed a certifying officer to certify travel claims, vouchers, will also certify appropriations availability for travel authorizations. Interestingly, Federal Travel Regulation Section 301-71.104 allows the same person who certifies funds availability to authorize travel. The regulation states, quote, "Who must sign a travel authorization? Your agency head or an official to whom such authority has been delegated. This authority may be delegated to any persons who is aware of how the authorized travel will support the agency's mission, who is knowledgeable of the employee's travel plans, and/or responsible for the travel funds paying for the travel involved." End quote. Because the authorization of travel also includes directing employees in the department, and the assignment of work, the approving official role is separated from the certifying officer role. This is implemented through the eGov Travel Services Travel Management System settings, that establish distinct approving official and certifying officer roles. Accordingly, a travel authorization routes through these two officials separately. Appropriations availability must be certified before travel expenses may be authorized to be incurred. For this reason, a travel authorization routes to the certifying officer first. In certifying appropriations availability, the certifying officer examines the authorization, and tests it to ensure it is compliant as to purpose, time, and amounts. Depending on how they are being used, appropriations may or may not be legally available for obligation and outlay payment. The purpose law is 31 U.S.C. Section 1301, which states, quote, "Appropriations shall be applied only to the objects for which appropriations were made, except as otherwise provided by law." End quote. An appropriation made for a specific object is available for expenses necessarily incident to that object. Additionally, the term necessary expenses is, by definition, for miscellaneous objects. Before continuing with objects, we will need to examine the necessary expense doctrine, and how it relates to purpose and travel. It should never be assumed that appropriations assigned to an account means they can be certified. A certifying officer must look at the expenses requested, and how they will be used. This is the reason certain expenses require justification. The justification is the employee's opportunity to explain how the travel expense will be incurred, that is, how the expenditure will be used. One cannot simply assume that using a taxi while on official travel means the taxi will be used for official business. How does the certifying officer know the taxi isn't being used by the employee for their personal business? The employee is supposed to justify how the expense will be used when a justification is required. For example, taxi fare from government office to site being inspected. Through its rulings, the Government Accountability Office has established the necessary expense doctrine, which establishes that the item to be procured is considered necessary if it will contribute materially to, or is necessarily incident to accomplish the authorized appropriations purpose. CGAO-04-261 SB. Applying the necessary expense doctrine requires the following considerations be made. 1. There must be a logical relationship between the expenditure and the appropriation. 2. The expenditure must not be prohibited. 3. The expenditure must not be provided for in another appropriation. We will look at each consideration as it relates to travel authority, and provide some illustrations. Consideration 1. Logical relationship. The Federal Travel Regulation determines allowable travel expenses, but it cannot possibly list everything, due to the dynamic nature of industry. To account for this, it allows for miscellaneous expenses. A miscellaneous expense must be logically related to travel, the act of transiting from one place to another. An employee cannot assert that personal hygiene products are a miscellaneous travel expense because they will attend to their hygiene while on official travel. Similarly, a bottle of shampoo is not a miscellaneous expense simply because its travel size meets aviation security regulations. When considering miscellaneous expenses, they must logically relate to the act of transiting from one place to another. Consideration 2. Expenditure must not be prohibited. In most cases, a law, regulation, or policy will establish what is allowed. Sometimes, it is necessary to expressly state in a law, regulation, or policy what is not allowed. For example, the Fly America Act expressly requires a specific certification to be performed if a foreign-flagged airline is used for official government travel. To implement this, the Federal Travel Regulation expressly states that an employee who uses a foreign flag carrier is prohibited from being reimbursed the cost of the airfare, until they either obtain the approving official's Fly America Act certification, or make the specific Fly America Act use certification themselves, and provide it with the claim, voucher. In the realm of executive branch travel, claimants will appeal disallowances to the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals, CBCA. The board's rulings are very useful toward clarifying whether expenditures are prohibited. One common issue certifying officers face, and which the CBCA has repeatedly ruled on, is improper retroactive amendments of travel authorizations. Retroactive amendments will be covered at length in this training, but for now it is important to understand how they relate to certifying appropriations as to availability. Executing a retroactive amendment requires the travel authorization to go through the entire travel authorization request, certification, and approval process again. Unfortunately, most cases of retroactive amendments do not meet the limited, express legal basis for making proper retroactive amendments. The most common reasons, which we will call considerations, for making improper retroactive amendments of travel authorizations include: supervisor approval or direction. My supervisor told me to do it. A common or past practice, this is how we have always done it. Fairness, it's not fair if the employee can't be reimbursed. Good idea, it would improve employee morale if we did this, or all that matters is that the employee be brought home safely. Rhetoric, this is a very important mission. Ignorance, I didn't know we couldn't do this. Implication elsewhere, if we don't do this, then the employee's IBA travel charge card will be suspended. Logic, it was more expensive to fly on a US-flagged aircraft than a foreign-flagged carrier. Compassion, I feel bad they spent all that money out of pocket. Certifying officers must understand that all the aforementioned considerations are irrelevant when the travel expense to be incurred does not meet the necessary expense doctrine criteria. If Congress wishes for those considerations to be relevant, then it will pass legislation to make those considerations relevant. Certifying officers should be vigilant for such irrelevant considerations, should not be swayed or compelled by them, and should teach approving officials to perform in the same manner. Occasionally, certifying officers and other employees misinterpret a law, regulation, or policy by assuming that a rule allows for something if it doesn't expressly prohibit it. For example, a law might state, Appropriations may be used for X, Y, and Z. An unsavvy reader might reason, well, it doesn't say the appropriations can't be used for A, B, and C, so I guess they can be. It should never be assumed that a law, regulation, or policy allows for something just because it doesn't expressly prohibit it. Rather, the rules should be read from a limited viewpoint, and applied exactly as written, without assuming authority not expressly stated. Sometimes, but not always, a law, regulation, or policy will have a catch-all provision that allows for the exercise of judgment. Whenever there is doubt as to whether an expenditure is prohibited, the certifying officer should consult with counsel for a legal opinion. Consideration 3. Expenditure must not be provided for another appropriation. The expenditure must not be provided for another appropriation. This consideration is pretty straightforward, and is typically addressed by the assignment of appropriations to accounts. For instance, fees charged to industry as the funding source for the travel costs of certain Food and Drug Administration inspectors. A certifying officer must check the travel purpose identifier and other information on a travel request, and ensure that can apply to the document is the correct appropriation source for the travel's purpose. Let's look at objects more closely. Objects refers to the major object class, as specified in Office of Management and Budget Circular A11. The major object class 20, Contractual Services and Supplies, accounts for object classes 21 through 26. We will focus on object class 21.0, Travel and Transportation of Persons. Object class 21.0 includes, quote, travel and transportation costs of government employees and other persons, while in an authorized travel status, that are to be paid by the government, either directly, or by reimbursing the traveler. Consists of both travel away from official stations, subject to regulations governing civilian and military travel, and local travel and transportation of persons, in and around the official station of an employee, end quote. The Federal Travel Regulation implements various statutes pertaining to Object Class 21.0, by specifying the types of allowable expenses that comprise Object Class 21.0, which it calls expense types. There are three major categories of expense types: 1. Transportation, 2. Per diem, and 3. Miscellaneous expenses. The regulation then subdivides the three major categories into subcategories. For example, per diem is subcategorized as A. Per diem lodging, and B. Per diem meals and incidental expenses. Likewise, transportation is subcategorized as A. Common carrier transportation, B. Government vehicle, C. Privately owned vehicle, and D. Special conveyances. The travel management system aligns the expense types to the object class through the financial management system. An overarching consideration of certifying appropriations availability is the travel's purpose. It is important for certifying officers to understand that they are empowered to discern whether the purpose of travel to be performed is legitimate. The Federal Travel Regulation establishes 6 official categorical purposes under which official travel may be performed. Employee emergency. Mission, operational. Special agency mission. Conference, other than training. Training, and relocation. The regulation defines in detail exactly what constitutes each of these travel purposes. See Federal Travel Regulation Appendix C to Chapter 301, Standard Data Elements for Federal Travel. Traveler Identification, Group Name, Travel Purpose Identifier. Additionally, when the individual who will travel is serving without pay or at $1 a year, also referred to as an invitational traveler, the Comptroller General of the United States has established additional requirements that pertain to appropriations availability as to purpose. These additional requirements establish a 5-part test that certifying officers must apply. 1. The business at hand must be within the statutory authority of the Department. See 42 U.S.C. and 25 U.S.C., Chapter 18, Indian Healthcare. 2. The persons must be private individuals, and not in the full or part-time employ of the government, serving without compensation. See 5 U.S.C. Section 5703, per diem, travel, and transportation expenses, experts and consultants, individuals serving without pay. 3. The persons must be summoned by the government, the travel must be at the government's request. See 39 Comp Gen 55. 4. The service must be provided solely to the government. CB 134260, November 20, 1957, 37 Comp Gen 349, and 5. The persons must be away from their home or regular place of business. See Federal Travel Regulation, Part 300-3, Glossary of Terms, Official Travel. Remember, travel must fully align to these specific purposes and tests for it to be official. Appropriations availability as to purpose cannot be certified for any other reason. Other limits apply to appropriations availability as to purpose, as well. These are implemented by Federal Travel Regulations Section 301-70.1, and include budget constraints, appropriations availability, travel policies, reasonableness of expenses, alternatives to traveling such as teleconferencing, and more. In certifying appropriations availability as to purpose, a certifying officer has the authority and obligation to question whether the expense types and amounts to be incurred are reasonable. A certifying officer does not have to certify appropriations availability, unless they are assured that the expenses are reasonable, the budget can support the travel is necessary and cannot be performed by a virtual meeting or a teleconference, and the expenses conform to policy. In this regard, a certifying officer acts as a gatekeeper in preventing fraud, waste abuse, and mismanagement. A certifying officer should never certify appropriations availability as to purpose if there are indications of impropriety or non-compliance. Exercise. Employee A submits a travel authorization request to travel to England on February 20 to receive an honorary degree. The program office is advised that appropriations may not be used for employees to travel to accept honorary degrees. Employee A then submits a new travel authorization to travel to England on February 20 to meet with colleagues to discuss a program activity. Should appropriations availability be certified as to purpose? Answer: no. The employee is obviously attempting to travel to England for the original purpose. Additionally, a discussion about program activity can be performed by a virtual meeting or teleconference. When there is doubt as to the real purpose of travel, appropriations availability should not be certified. The limits Congress sets related to time as a means for the legislative branch to assert its authority. A time-limited appropriation is available to incur an obligation against, only during the period for which it is made. It remains available beyond that period, usually 5 years, to make adjustments to the amount of obligations, and to make payments to liquidate obligations. Most official travel is funded by annual appropriations, so-called one-year money. These appropriations are available for the fiscal year authorized only. The official travel must occur within the fiscal year the appropriations are available. Sometimes, legislation will authorize appropriations for multiple of years, or even allow appropriations to be used indefinitely until fully consumed. A certifying officer certifies appropriations availability as to time, by ensuring that the funds to be obligated for an employee's travel are from the correct fiscal year's appropriations. The eGov Travel Services Travel Management System automates this somewhat by allowing the user to select a common accounting number, CAN, to use. CANs are generated from the department's financial management systems, and made available for selection in the travel management system. The CAN alphanumeric naming convention includes the fiscal year. Exercise. Several claims are received from an employee who retired 6 years ago. However, the claimant does not provide the approved travel authorizations that show that the appropriations availability was certified, or that the travel was authorized. The Federal Travel Regulation has a rule which allows a claim to be paid without an authorization. The designated approving official recalls that they authorized all the travel, and that the employee performed the travel. Can replacement authorizations be created to process the claims? Answer: no. Not only have the appropriations expired for the time the travel occurred, 5 years, but the statute of limitations for claiming reimbursement of travel expenses incurred has also expired, 6 years. The Antideficiency Act prohibits making obligations or expenditures in excess of an apportionment, or reapportionment, or in excess of the amount permitted by agency regulations. See 31 U.S.C. Section 1517a. An apportionment is the action by which the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, distributes amounts available for obligation, including budgetary reserves established pursuant to law, in an appropriation or fund account. An apportionment divides amounts available for obligation by specific time periods, usually quarters, activities, projects, objects, or a combination thereof. Budget officers commonly refer to the apportionment as the funds drop. The amounts so apportioned limit the amount of obligations that may be incurred. An apportionment may be further subdivided by an agency into allotments, sub-allotments, and allocations. Certifying availability of appropriations as to amounts is pretty straightforward. The certifying officer verifies that the fund account, the CAN, within the financial management system has a sufficient amount of appropriations assigned to it, so that all current and future transactions can be recorded. Current transactions are the obligations that have already occurred, the travel authorizations that have already been approved. Future transactions are those which will be certified by the certifying officer. The certifying officer must consider the totality of obligations already against the CAN before certifying. This might require the certifying officer to produce or obtain a report from either the financial management system or the travel management system to determine the amount of obligations already made against the CAN. If there is an insufficient amount, then the certification should not be performed until appropriations are applied to the account. This is true even if the employee must immediately travel. An individual employee's perception of exigency does not provide exception to the Antideficiency Act, nor does urgency trump the Constitution or the authority the Constitution vests Congress. The government is liable for payment of charges applied to a centrally billed account, CBA. Centrally billed accounts are invoice accounts, meaning they are paid by submission of an invoice, a form of claim, to the government. Centrally billed accounts can often have multi-million-dollar credit lines. The utility of centrally billed accounts has been modernized to give them electronic funds transfer capabilities using bank account numbers and electronic security features the same as credit cards. Nevertheless, overall, centrally billed accounts are considered high risk. For budget and accounting purposes, a credit line is treated the same as appropriations. Not doing so would be an improper augmenting of appropriations, which is an Antideficiency Act violation. Accordingly, any use of a centrally billed account's credit is subject to appropriations availability. Normally, when written travel authorization is established in the eGov Travel Services travel management system, certification of appropriations availability properly occurs before a charge is applied to a centrally billed account. However, there is a practice, a bad one at that, in which employees are sometimes authorized to travel, without a proper written travel authorization having been first approved. In such cases, a centrally billed account approving official might verbally approve a travel management company travel agent to charge the cost of airfare, and the associated TMC service fee, to a centrally billed account. Even in such occurrences, a certifying officer must first certify appropriations availability before the expenditure may be authorized. A centrally billed account approving official may not authorize charges to be applied to the account until after they have had the appropriations availability certified by a certifying officer. The approving official must also record the certification information in the centrally billed account transaction register that they are required to keep. Failure to obtain the certification of appropriations availability before making the expenditure is willful Antideficiency Act violation. Review the current edition of the HHS Annual Travel Charge Card Management Plan for more information about centrally billed account procedures. Knowledge check. Within their written travel authorization request, Employee X includes a miscellaneous expense of $5 for a travel-size toothpaste to be used while on official duty. Which of the following best describes whether the certifying officer should certify the authorization? A. Yes, because allowing or disallowing expenses is the responsibility of the approving official, not the certifying officer. B. No. Because toothpaste does not logically constitute a travel expense, it does not meet the criteria for appropriations availability as to purpose. C. Yes. Because the CAN has more than $5 available to be assigned, it meets the criteria for appropriations availability as to amounts. D. No, because the expense does not satisfy the Comptroller General's additional requirement that the service is being provided solely to the government. Pause the video, consider your response, and then resume to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is B. No. Because toothpaste does not logically constitute a travel expense, it does not meet the criteria for appropriations availability as to purpose. Several employees are traveling next week, all using the same CAN for travel expenses. What should the certifying officer do to certify appropriations availability as to amounts? A. Charge all travel expenses to the agency's centrally billed account, which has a line of credit sufficient for even a large number of travelers. B. Use the first employee's authorization as a baseline amount, multiply by the number of employees, and check that number against the amount available in the CAN. C. Consider the expenses of the entire group as a whole, as well as any other current or future transactions, and ensure that the totality of obligations is available in the CAN. D. Because the travel is urgent, perform a rough estimate now, and then do a thorough check while the employees are traveling. Pause the video, consider your response, and then resume to learn the correct answer. The answer is C. Consider the expenses of the entire group as a whole, as well as any other current or future transactions, and ensure that the totality of obligations is available in the can. A certifying officer notices that an employee's authorization request utilizes an annual appropriation, 1 year money, but that the travel dates traverse across 2 different fiscal years. What should they do to best certify appropriations availability as to time? A. Change the assigned appropriation to one that is multi-year or no year. B. Use the appropriation for the fiscal year during which most of the travel occurs. C. Instruct the approving official to adjust the travel dates, because the employee cannot travel across 2 fiscal years. D. Instruct the employee to create 2 separate authorizations, one for each fiscal year. Pause the video, consider your response, and then resume to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is D. Instruct the employee to create 2 separate authorizations, one for each fiscal year. Lesson 4, Certification in the Antideficiency Act. This lesson consists of 3 parts. The learning objectives. The course content. 3 knowledge check questions. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define the Antideficiency Act as it relates to travel, including the 2 common travel-related Antideficiency Act violations and how to prevent them. The 3 agency operational responsibilities with regard to the Act. The 2 common travel-related Antideficiency Act violations are 1. Certifying availability of funds without knowing the amount of funds available in an account, insufficient funds on can. 2. Certifying availability of funds while knowing the amount available in an account is insufficient with the intent to switch accounts. Certifying officers must never guess as to amounts remaining on a can or assume as to the appropriations availability, as this will likely result in a willful Antideficiency Act violation. It's willful because a fundamental obligation of a certifying officer is to exercise due diligence, which applied means actually performing the activity of checking the obligations already assigned to the can. A common Antideficiency Act violation committed by certifying officers is certifying appropriation availability as to amounts by authorizing a particular can to be used knowing that the can has insufficient funds available. Then, when the employee files the travel claim, voucher, it fails processing because of appropriations aren't available. The program office then exchanges the can having insufficient funds to one having sufficient funds to allow the processing to continue. Or, the program office will add funds to the can having insufficient funds so the claim, voucher, processing resumes. There are 3 operational responsibilities, otherwise known as PAM: prevent, avoid, and mitigate. Prevent. Keep Antideficiency Act violations from occurring. Prevention includes training certifying officers, communicating penalties, and implementing procedures. Avoid. Stop Antideficiency Act violations from occurring. Emplacing control activities like automation that summarizes obligations and stops further obligations from occurring when appropriations aren't available, or emplacing approval stamps within systems. Mitigate. To make the impacts of an Antideficiency Act violation less severe. Mitigation includes applying appropriations to an account. Mitigation can also include taking preventative steps, such as canceling a violator's authority to certify appropriations availability and the IT system access needed to perform certification. While adding appropriations to a can or changing the can remediates the violation, it does not change the fact that the willful violation occurred. It must be reported, the Antideficiency Act violation must be investigated, and there are ramifications for the willful violation. Employees will oftentimes commit Antideficiency Act violations, too, by simply spending more than they're authorized to incur. Pursuant to 31 U.S. Code Section 1514A, the General Services Administration has prescribed by regulation a system of administrative control not inconsistent with accounting procedures prescribed under law. The Federal Travel Regulation establishes travel authorizations as part of the system of administrative control. It might be recalled from earlier in this training the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals has succinctly written in its rulings. A travel order establishes the conditions, in writing, under which official travel and transportation are authorized at government expense and provides a notice and record of the employee's instructions and entitlements. Accordingly, unless an employee's travel orders were clearly erroneous, in conflict with a law, regulation, or agency instruction, or were Contrary to the agency's definite intentions when the orders were issued, an agency cannot retroactively amend travel orders to increase or decrease the employee's benefits. When an employee exceeds the amount listed on the approved travel authorization, they are in violation of 31 U.S. Code Section 1517. A. An officer or employee of the United States government or of the District of Columbia government may not make or authorize an expenditure or obligation exceeding 1. An apportionment, or 2. The amount permitted by regulations prescribed under Section 1514A of this title. An employee's violation of the Act overspending can result in a cascading series of reportable Antideficiency Act violations when a program office attempts to cover the employee's overspending by improperly retroactively amending the authorization. Second violation, the certifying officer certifies the retroactively amended travel authorization. Third violation, the approving official approves the retroactively amended travel authorization. Fourth violation, the approving official approves the claim, voucher, resulting from the retroactive amendment. Fifth violation, the certifying officer the claim, voucher, resulting from the retroactive amendment. In such instances, the obligation of the certifying officer is to not certify a retroactively amended travel authorization, to inspect it, and then determine if it complies with the three lawful reasons for making the amendment. Certifying officers, program managers, and employees alike should understand violators of the Antideficiency Act are subject to appropriate administrative discipline including, when circumstances warrant, suspension from duty without pay or removal from office, see 31 U.S.C. Section 1349, and imposition of a criminal fine of not more than $5,000 and/or a term of imprisonment for not more than 2 years. See 31 U.S.C. Section 1350. Antideficiency Act violations can be prevented through sound program management. A program manager should forecast the travel to be performed and coordinate with budget officials to have appropriations applied to accounts in sufficient amounts to support the planned travel. Program managers should also monitor the consumption of the funds, outlays. This can be done by using the eGov, Travel Services Travel Management System or the Financial Management System to report the outlays paid through travel claims, vouchers, and comparing the outlays, obligations, and available funds. If accounts have insufficient appropriations, then additional appropriations should be applied to the accounts before travel is certified and authorized. Above all, it is a responsibility of a certifying officer to actually check appropriations availability as to amounts before certifying a travel authorization. A certifying officer's consideration of appropriations availability as to purpose, time, and amounts is key to preventing willful and inadvertent violations of the Anti-Deficiency Act. Doing so supports the success of the Department of Health and Human Services. Exercise 1. Certifying officer receives a travel authorization request in their eGov, Travel Services work queue. They know there is $5,000 assigned to the CAN listed on the travel authorization request and there have been trips already certified and approved that have obligated the funds. At the same time, they know the financial operations team is recovering about $10,000 from the FEMA emergency fund that the budget team will assign to the CAN. May the appropriations availability be certified? Exercise 1 Answer. No. The certifying officer must exercise due diligence to determine if appropriations are actually available at the time of certification. They cannot anticipate funds will be recovered or even that the budget office will assign the funds to the account. If the certifying officer certifies appropriations availability, they would be committing a willful Anti-Deficiency Act violation. Exercise 2. Certifying officer B receives a travel claim, voucher. The approval date appears to have been applied after the start date of the travel. Should the certifying officer certify the voucher for payment? Exercise 2 Answer. No. Instead, the claim, voucher, should be inspected. If the inspection determines the claim was retroactively amended, there should be a note within the electronic record that justifies the amendment, consistent with the 3 legal standards. If there is not one, the claim, voucher, should be returned to the approving official with instructions to either enter the proper legal justification or to disallow the improper expense and enter an explanatory note consistent with the FTR's requirements. Keep in mind, the role of the certifying officer is not to do the approving official's work. What are the 3 operational responsibilities? A. Prepare, avoid, mitigate. B. Prevent, answer, moderate. C. Prevent, answer, mitigate. D. Prevent, avoid, mitigate. Click pause. consider your response, and then resume the video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is A. Prepare, avoid, mitigate. Who should determine the travel to be performed and coordinate to have appropriations applied to accounts in sufficient amounts? A. Program Manager. B. Employee/Traveler. C. Certifying Official. D. Employee's Supervisor. Click pause, consider your response, and then resume the video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is A. Program Manager. Who or what establishes travel authorizations? A. HHS Secretary. B. Federal Travel Regulation. C. Fair Trade Commission. D. Program Manager. Click pause, consider your response, and then resume the video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is B. Federal Travel Regulation. Lesson 5, Vouchering and Settlement, Certifying Payment of Claims, Vouchers. This lesson consists of 3 parts. The learning objectives. The course content. 3 knowledge check questions. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define a travel claim, voucher. Identify who is ultimately responsible for the validity of a travel claim. Define, assume, responsibility, ultimate, and validity as they relate to travel claims. The Federal Travel Regulation defines a travel claim, voucher, as a written request, supported by documentation and receipts where applicable, for reimbursement of expenses incurred in the performance of official travel, including permanent change of station, PCS, travel. Upon the completion of official travel, an employee must present their claim to the government within 5 calendar days of returning to work after the last day of travel. The regulation prescribes specific activities that must be performed before the claim may be paid and ultimately settled. Before we get into those activities, we'll first review the responsibilities of a certifying officer. It's very important for this to be understood because the Federal Travel Regulation not only prescribes what activities must be done, but who must perform them and how quickly. The Federal Travel Regulation System, the regulation that governs travel by employees of the executive branch, is where one can find the starting point of the definition and responsibilities of a certifying officer. FTR Section 30171.203 states, who is responsible for the validity of the travel claim. The certifying officer assumes ultimate responsibility under 31 U.S.C. 3528 for the validity of the claim, however. A. The traveler must ensure all travel expenses are prudent and necessary and submit the expenses in the form of a proper claim. B. The authorizing/approving official shall review the completed claim to ensure that the claim is properly prepared in accordance with regulations and agency procedures prior to authorizing it for payment. Note to Section 30171.203, you should consider limiting the levels of approval to the lowest level of management. So, what does this really mean? Let's first look at some key words: assume, ultimate, responsibility, and validity. Assume means take or begin to have power. The regulation which has the force and effect of law empowers the certifying officer. Ultimate means being or happening at the end of a process, final. This means the certifying officer has the final word regardless of any other person's rank, position of authority, status, or actual or assumed authority. You've probably heard the expression, "the buck stops here." Well, for certifying officers it literally does stop here. Responsibility means the state or fact of being accountable or to blame for something. Consider that carefully because that word binds the certifying officer to a concept we'll discuss later: pecuniary liability. Validity means the state of being legally or officially binding or acceptable. Keep this in mind because this word speaks directly to the duties of the certifying officer versus the duties of other persons in the claims process. For the purpose of this training we must further dissect this particular FTR section by looking at the law it cites, 31 U.S.C. Section 3528. What is the difference between a travel claim and a voucher? A. There is none. B. Travel claims are for trips longer than 30 consecutive days, vouchers are for less. C. Travel claims apply to plane and hotel costs, vouchers apply to other expenses such as M&IE. D. Travel claims are for expenses exceeding $300, vouchers are for expenses less than $300. Click pause, consider your response, and then resume this video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is A. There is none. Which of the following terms is defined as the state of being legally or officially binding or acceptable? A. Assume. B. Ultimate. C. Responsibility. D. Validity. Click pause, consider your response, and then resume this video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is D. Validity. Upon completion of official travel, an employee must present their travel claim within how many calendar days of returning to work after the last day of travel? A. 3. B. 4. C. 5. D. 6. Click pause, consider your response, and then resume this video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is C. 5. Lesson 6, the source of certifying officers today. This lesson consists of 3 parts. The learning objectives. The course content. 3 knowledge check questions. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to cite the general responsibilities of a certifying officer and the associated requirements, including the requirement for certifying officers to be assigned the duty in writing. Stewardship of the nation's finances is a core element of the Constitution, and since the earliest years of the United States as a sovereign country, the proper accounting and careful release of funds from the nation's treasury has been a serious matter of business. President George Washington attended to it by appointing Nicholas Eveley as the first Comptroller of the United States Treasury, to supervise the quality of accounting and financial reporting. As the nation and its business grew and evolved, roles and responsibilities to properly account for and control funds came into existence. Today, the executive branch has certifying officers who act as the final gatekeeper of the Treasury to assure the quality of accounting. Their purpose is not to prevent the release of money, but to ensure when money is released properly. Let's look at the source for today's certifying officers. The source can be traced back from FTR Section 301-71.203, to 31 U.S.C. Section 3528, and then to 31 U.S.C. Section 3325, Vouchers. Foremost, the law establishes what a certifying officer is. A certifying officer is, quote, a disbursing official in the executive branch of the United States government, end quote. That is, they pay out money from a fund on behalf of the executive branch, one of the 3 branches of the United States government. The law goes on to say the disbursing official, meaning a person holding public office or having official duties, may only pay out money through a voucher that has been certified. In most executive branch agencies, the employee who leads the financial operations program area is assigned as the disbursing official. When an agency has operational components that administer financial operations, the same role assignment is usually applied. It is important to understand that a certifying officer is not a disbursing official, but instead performs specific work for which the disbursing official is accountable. We will focus on certifying officer assignment now, and discuss applied certification of claims, vouchers, in detail later. 31 U.S.C. Section 3325, A1b, requires a certifying officer to be assigned the role in writing, quote, an officer or employee of the executive agency having written authorization from the head of the agency to certify vouchers, end quote. Except for the HHS Secretary, only an employee having written authorization to certify claims may do so. The Secretary is also vested authority by 5 U.S.C. Section 301, Departmental Regulations, to prescribe administrative regulations to manage the department and its operating components. The authority to designate employees in writing as certifying officers has been delegated to the respective operating division chief financial officers. For the Office of the Secretary, this authority has been delegated to the Assistant Secretary for Financial Resources. Further administrative delegation of this authority is performed as financial policy allows. Also, to establish assurance that an employee who will act as a certifying officer is capable of performing the lawful duties, the Secretary can require certifying officer candidates to gain the skills needed. This authority is delegated to the agency's senior travel official, who is required by Executive Order 13589 and the implementing FTR Bulletin, to align travel policy to financial policy. For this reason, certifying officers who certify travel claims, vouchers, must complete training on the role before they may perform the duties. Completing this training qualifies an employee to be assigned in writing as a certifying officer. It does not substitute for the management decision to assign a particular employee to the role or meet the legal requirement for the assignment to be written. A disbursing official may only pay out money via which of the following methods? A. Certified check. B. Certified voucher. C. cash. D. Direct deposit. Click pause, consider your response, and resume the video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is B. Certified voucher. To whom may the HHS Secretary delegate responsibility for ensuring that candidates for certifying officers have the required skills? A. The Comptroller. B. The Operating Division Chief Financial Officer. C. The agency Senior Travel Official. D. The Employee's Supervisor. Click pause, consider your response, and resume the video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is C. The agency Senior Travel Official. Who is defined as a person holding public office or having official duties who, in most executive branch agencies, leads the financial operations program area. A. Certifying officer. B. Disbursing official. C. Agency Senior Travel Official. D. Comptroller. Click pause, consider your response and resume the video to learn the correct answer. The correct answer is B. Disbursing official.